So you're chasing that cinematic look with lots of motion blur, you've got your ND filters ready and you know a slower shutter speed is the key. But like me, you're probably asking, what shutter speed exactly?
That's why I'm here at the Olympic rowing course, where I can test different speeds and shutter settings in a controlled environment. Let's go! Okay, let's step back for a second. Before we look at shutter speed, we have to settle on a frame rate. This is a sensitive topic because it really comes down to personal preference. This video is shot and delivered in 60 frames per second because I think the look of high frame rates gives the best immersion for point of view footage. If you prefer 24 or 30 frames per second, that's totally fine too, because in this video we are focusing on motion blur, and motion blur is only a product of shutter speed, not of frame rate. There's one thing to keep in mind though when shooting in high frame rates. By simple math, 60 FPS footage only allows for a slow shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. So if you see slower shutter speeds later in this video, the footage was shot at 30 FPS. If you look closely, you can see how these shots are not quite as smooth. Now make sure you've set the video to the highest quality setting and let's get back to the road. Getting maximum motion blur really comes down to how slow of a shutter speed we can choose before we create a blurry mess. And spoiler alert, it's really easy to create a blurry mess. Not only does the scenery get blurry as it moves by, but every camera shake will blur the entire image. And if you're riding a bike, the camera shakes a lot. Electronic stabilization like Hypersmooth can reduce shaky motion by reframing the image, but it cannot restore lost detail. So your footage might look stable, but the blur will still be there. So if you don't want to strap a gimbal to your chest, you need smooth roads and a steady upper body. And since motion blur requires motion, riding fast really helps too. I'll start with some easy runs at 35 km per hour and then see what my legs have in them today. And if you're wondering why I'm using this custom ND filter, check out my last video.
I picked this test segment because it has a mix of textures and objects along the road, which makes the motion blur differences easy to see. Starting with the slowest possible shutter speed at 30 frames per second, which is 1/30th of a second, we can immediately see the creamy motion blur. The grass pavers on the right melt into grey streaks. You can also see that the electronic stabilization is struggling because there aren't enough sharp details. If I pause on a particular bad frame, you can't even read the numbers on the computer. From now on I'll call this shake blur, since it's caused not by forward motion but by unintentional camera shake. At 1/45th of a second we already see some improvements, but even the slight upper body motion from pedaling at low power is enough to cause shake blur. So I'd say these long shutter speeds just aren't practical without some form of mechanical stabilization. 1/60th of a second is where things get interesting. We are now recording at 60 frames per second and the electronic stabilization is working much better. The shake blur has improved quite a bit. On smaller screens it's barely noticeable, so this could work well for reels or short form content. At 1/90th of a second, the shake blur has improved even further, but we are starting to see some texture in the grass pavers as the motion blur gets weaker. At 120th of a second, the shake blur is completely gone, while there's still a tiny bit of motion blur. This could be a good option if you're on rough roads or want to play it safe. For science, I did another run at 240th of a second. The image is now crisp and almost completely free of motion blur. We can even see details in the grass on the right. To make comparison easier, I prepared these side-by-side views. I'd recommend starting with one of these settings depending on your road surface and tolerance for shake blur.
Now that I'm warmed up, let's bring the speed up to 50 km per hour. This will introduce some upper body movement, but I'll try my best to keep it steady.
I wanted to keep the same perspective as in the slower runs, so I couldn't get into a full aero position. As you can see on the computer, this required me to push over 500 watts. Because of the heavier body movement, we now get bad shake blur, even at 1/60th of a second. But because of the higher speed, the motion blur has also increased. So even with faster shutter speeds of 1/90th or 120th of a second, we still get that sense of speed. I finished the set again with a run at 1/240th of a second, which now shows some motion blur in the bottom right corner. In the side-by-side views we can see that with the newly introduced camera movement it's a good idea to increase the shutter speed by 1 or 2 steps. Compared with 35 km per hour we can also see the increased motion blur at the same shutter speed.
That went well, so for my last runs I'll just go as fast as my legs will let me.
Unfortunately, by this point I was tired and could only reach 60 km per hour, not enough for significantly more motion blur. But we can still learn that an all-out sprint with a chest mount will cause shake blur, even with faster shutter speeds.
Lesson learned, the rougher your ride and the more the camera moves, the faster your shutter speed needs to be to avoid shake blur. Now you have a useful range of settings to try for your own projects. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. To wrap things up, here are some real-world clips at different shutter speeds. Enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one.